All right. Well, we're going to get started. Thanks for coming, folks. Be sure to keep your mics on mute so we don't have any extra sounds going on. I am recording this, so Mr. White can watch it later if he wants to. And if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat. Let's keep the chat relevant for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. And then if you guys want to keep chatting afterwards and see how everybody's doing, go for that. But right now, let's keep it relevant to what we're doing. So today we're talking about instrument maintenance, and we're talking about specifically brass instruments. So when we're talking about brass instruments, I'm going to cover some things you may know, you may not already know. It's good to have a brush up on that anyway. So we're talking about trumpets and trombones. As we get older, for some of you, that could include French horns, tubas, that sort of thing. But they baritones, yeah, euphoniums, mellophones. There's lots of brass instruments. The good thing about what we're going to talk about is what I'm going to show you is good for pretty much all the brass instruments, depending on what you're playing. So we're going to start small with the trumpet. So let me grab a trumpet. Actually, I think this is a cornet. So any of these instruments that have valves are going to work about the same way. And the way valves work are pretty cool. These were invented back in like, the mid 1800s when they first figured out how to put valves onto instruments. So as you blow into what we call the lead pipe, all brass instruments have a lead pipe, and we put the mouthpiece right there. It's going to swirl around, and then it's going to enter somewhere. In this case, it enters right here. Every brass instrument's a little bit different. But what's happening is that sound is just going straight through these little pipes and coming right out the bell. When we push down one of these valves, so this one, for instance, when we push that one down, what it's doing is redirecting the air to go through this extra pipe. This extra pipe right here is for the first valve. This extra pipe is for the second valve. And then the third valve is right here in the back. And each one of those changes the length of the instrument. When we don't press down the valves, it's not going through this, and it's not going through this, and it's not going through this. So that's kind of how those brass instruments work. All we're doing is creating that sound by blowing into the mouthpiece, and then we're changing the length of that sound. It's much easier to see that happen on a trombone when you're literally making the trombone longer. But on a brass instrument, we're just pushing down these valves. So one of the first things to know about maintenance is if your valves are sticking, if they're not moving well, don't bang on them. Don't just start hitting them and trying to get them to work, because what's happening inside, it's metal pushing on metal with a spring. And the spring could be in the bottom for some of your instruments, and it could be built into the valve. And all those things are metal components, and metal can bend, metal can dent, metal can break. And if you do something forceful and bang on it, then you have a chance of ruining that. So the very first thing you want to do is just add some oil. And this should be pretty common for most of you. Hopefully you can get them unscrewed. So we just undo that and we pull this one out. And this one, for instance, I'll get that to the camera, has a spring built into the valve. It's actually inside there. Some of the larger instruments don't have a spring there. The spring is actually inside that hole right there. But if you can pull that out, I would go over top of a trash can so you're not making a mess in your house, and grab something that says valve oil on it. This one says, this one's sort of multi-purpose, valve, slide, and key oil. We'll talk about those differences later. But you're just going to take this cap off, and you're going to put a little bit around here. You don't have to go all the way up and down and crazy. Just put some around that, and it's just going to drip and ooze its way down. If you've ever done anything with oil, maybe when you're cooking or fixing a car or something, oil spreads very easily, and that's the great thing about that. But do it over a trash can so you're not getting oil everywhere. Then you're going to put it back in your instrument very carefully. It'll just slide down. Now, every instrument with valves, they're numbered. So if you're playing a valve instrument, you should know exactly which valve is which. The one closest to your face, number one, that's the one on this instrument, and most of them have this. I don't know if you can see in the video. This one's actually stamped with a 1, a 2, and a 3. And then there's the serial number for the whole thing. So if you ever get confused, you've got that. And then on the valve itself, almost every brass instrument have these numbered. So this one's right, I don't know if you can see that well, but it's labeled number 1. Some bigger instruments have them labeled right up here, so you have to lift this up. So, but what I would suggest, if you just take one out at a time, you won't get confused about which goes where. Now, all of the brass instruments have guides built in, and it may be this metal piece like we have with the spring. Some, if you lift this up, you're going to find a plastic piece right in there, and then there's a part that sticks out a little. In this case, you can see this part that sticks out a little. If it's up here, sometimes metal, sometimes plastic. It doesn't really matter what type, but you'll have that, and that's called a guide. And if you put your valve back in and you turn it, did you hear that click? Let me turn again. It spins, it spins. How do I know it's the right way? It'll click. It'll click itself in, and then you screw it back on. Eric asked, what happens if you put them in wrong? If you put them in the wrong way, it's just not going to work. You're going to blow into it, and the holes that are in these valves, there's different holes for each valve because they're going to different places, won't line up, so the air won't get through. So it just won't work. So if you put your valves in and you blow into it and it doesn't work, like the air isn't getting through, there's two problems that it could be. One is you've got the wrong valve in. Two could be you didn't turn it till it clicked. So if you screw it in, you could have it in all that way and didn't turn it, so it's not lined up around the cylinder of this valve. So once that clicks, you know it's in place and it's going to work. Now, the question I hear a lot is, my valves are stuck. I can't get them out. How do I oil them? Well, I would not bang on this at all. You know, if you've got a strong friend or your dad or somebody who you can get a good grip on and try to turn that, great, give it a try. If it doesn't open, don't sweat it. Turn your instrument upside down, and there are holes in the bottom valves. That's really just to let air out. But perhaps these unscrew, and if those unscrew, you can take that off and get lots of oil in there. Do that over a trash can, but add oil into that hole and move the valve up and down a bunch of times. You'll see it move in there. And when you do that, you're going to get that oil moved down into the valve, and it'll loosen up your valve so it'll play. That's not going to necessarily make this top part work. If it's stuck, it's stuck. There are ways to get that unstuck, but I don't want you trying them. If you can't get this back cap off, there are holes in it. You can put a little bit of oil in there. It's just a little trickier because it's such a small space. Okay? So when you're adding oil, you can do it in the top or the bottom. If you do it in the bottom, keep your instrument upside down for a little bit and work these valves to make sure that the oil is in there. Because if you just pour a bunch of oil in there and then flip this over to play it, you probably just dumped a ton of oil into your lap and ruined your pants. So don't do that. If you try those things and it's still sticking a little, one other thing to try is to pull one of your slides out. So let's say I'm having a problem with this valve, and I look down, and this is the slide that goes into that valve. Okay? I'm going to pull this slide out, assuming that slide works, and now I've got direct access into this valve right here. I can put a little oil in there, and it's going to go right into that valve. And then maybe that'll help loosen it up too. A little oil goes a long way. And then make sure on any brass instrument, if you're pulling a slide in and out, press down the valve that's part of that slide, because you're creating, this is our science experiment for the day, you're creating an air vacuum. So this is full of air, and this is full of air. And if I push this down, I'm pushing two columns of air together, and they've got nowhere to go, and that can warp your valve a little. So if you push this down, it allows the air to escape through the trumpet or whatever instrument you're playing. Okay? So basics of oiling, make sure it says valve oil on it somewhere. This particular one says valve oil right there. But here's another thing that looks just like valve oil, but it says key oil. There we go. It says key oil. So that's intended for another purpose. It may or may not hurt your instrument, but you're better off making sure you get the right stuff. Now, when it comes to, I said, these are stuck, just let them be stuck so you don't want to ruin them if these are stuck. If your parents have a big set of pliers or something, and your dad, your brother, whatever, comes in and just starts grabbing this and just start spinning it, you very well will probably get your valve loose. You'll probably get it open. But what you'll do as you're doing that is you're going to mangle all this great metal work around here. It's going to scratch because it's got metal on metal. You may dent it. These are very soft metals. They're not super hard metals. It's not like steel or anything that can take a beating. So you don't want to use like a big metal piece to open these up. I would get it to me. I have special tools that work for that. That won't, what we call, mar the finish. Another thing to note, if something is stuck, like let's say a mouthpiece is stuck. Let me grab the mouthpiece. So we've got our mouthpiece. Let's say it's stuck in here. I have a couple tools, and a lot of you brass people know this, that can pop that out without hurting your instrument. The worst thing you could do is put a pair of pliers right here, because then you're going to scratch up this whole mouthpiece, and it's not going to feel good anymore. And if you scratch your instrument up, that's not good. The other thing that's really important is all brass instruments are held together with different braces, and these braces are all over the place. That's what adds to the stability of this instrument. So think of like a bridge. You know, on a bridge, people are just driving across the road part of the bridge, but there's all these braces making it stable so it's safer. Same thing here. So if you start grabbing things really hard with pliers or something, you can break these braces because they're not made for all that work, and we don't want to hurt your instrument when you're doing that. So if this is stuck, what I usually tell people is, you know, good news, your instrument is ready to perform. You've got your mouthpiece in it. Bad news is it may not fit in your case anymore because you can't close your case with the mouthpiece. Some of you might have a case that does work, but know that I've got tools that pop those out. The same is true of slides. If your slides move, awesome. If they don't start yanking and pulling super hard and trying to, you know, put a hammer on it. You're going to dent all this soft brass. If it's stuck, two things you can do. First thing is try to put a little bit of that valve oil, even though it's not for a valve, around this edge. Do it over a trash can, and then hold it up and see if some of that penetrates that area. And that might soften it. So if you give it a good strong pull, you might be able to get it open. But don't pull too hard, because then these braces here may disconnect, and then you've got bigger problems. Okay. If these work great, awesome for you. If not, I have some tools that can help with that, and the music store does. If you're renting it from somewhere, chances are that's included in your rental, and you can get that paid for. But what you want to do is you can get these out, clean them real well. You know, this is metal. This can go in the tub. It can go in the washer, or not in the washer, in the sink. And then get something that's called slide oil or slide cream or grease, something like that, and put a little bit on it. Put it on the end points here. Don't put them down here, because what you're going to do is, once I get grease all over one of these, I'm going to just stick that part in. I'm going to work this around. As I'm pushing down, that grease is going to get spread all over that pipe. And I'm working it around, and that's going to help keep that. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm going to work that all the way around that pipe. And then once I've done that, I'm going to stick it back in, and it will be good for a long time once you get that grease on there. Okay? So you can do that to all of your connections here, all these slides. Trombones, you've got just the one in the back right before the bell. So same thing with there. You want to keep that lubricated and ready to go. With anything, if you're wiping it or cleaning it, get a soft cloth. This one is sort of like a felt. If you have an old washcloth that mom says you can just keep in your case, that's fine. Don't use anything abrasive. Even certain papers can scratch things, and we don't want to scratch anything. We want to keep it soft. So they do make specific polishing cloths for instruments. That's what this one is, but you don't need to use a specific one. Just get a nice old towel, old washcloth, that kind of thing. And brass instruments, aside from the valves, can really, you can fill up a tub or a sink of hot soapy water, and you can clean this thing. I would suggest being real careful of your spit valves, because those are made of cork, to make sure that those don't leak or anything. But if you can soak it and clean it a little bit. If your mouthpiece is super, super dirty, whatever you're using for to clean it is great, but you can also put this in the top of your dishwasher. So you can clean it that way. Just, you know, stick that hole over one of those rungs in the dishwasher. Make sure it's in the top, because the top doesn't get quite as hot. And you'll sanitize that pretty quickly. Brass instruments, that definitely works. I wanted to also point out, I haven't grabbed the trombone yet, so I'm going to grab that. Here's a great trombone slide. So we got half the trombone here. Trombone players, this is what makes you a good trombone player, however this slide moves. Okay, so be sure, if you have a question, just type it in and I'll get to it as soon as I can. If this isn't moving well, you're not playing well. So here's what I recommend. Take this outer slide off completely. And then take your soft cloth and wipe this down as best you can. If you've put creams or oils, this joint here, I don't know how well you can see it, is a little bit thicker at the end. All trombones are that way. It's hard to tell on the camera, but it gets a little bit thicker right there. This is the part that actually is touching the outer slide. This part up here isn't really touching anything. It's just this last, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches. So if you wipe this down really well, and you may need to use a wet cloth or whatever to get it really clean, and you get it clean, then my suggestion, and if you look at this stuff, see, like this one says valve, slide, and key oil. So this is technically okay for slides. This says tuning slide. Tuning slide. That is not for trombone slides. That's for the back of the trombone where we do the tuning, or those other slides like on the trumpet. Don't use this on your regular trombone slide. This is too sticky. It's not going to work well. But my recommendation, what I use on my trombones, is some sort of trombone cream. You can find a little thing of this at the music store pretty cheap, and you open it up, and it is a tiny bit. It's just a little bit of cream in there, almost looks like lotion. And it actually is pretty close to the formulas you get in lotion for your hands or whatever, except it doesn't have the fragrance to smell good. You put a little bit on your finger, just like that, and then I put it on the end of the slide. Just like with the tuning slides, I'm just going to put it on the end, and I'm just going to wrap it around a little bit. So I've got quite a bit just on the end there, and then I'm going to put in one side of the slide at a time. And when I do that, I'm just working it around because I just need to get it on that last like 6 inches or so of the slide. That's it. So if I do that on both sides, and you might have a little extra that comes off, just wipe it off with your cloth. When you do that, you're going to have a super smooth slide. And then the last thing I recommend for trombones, this works really well. Look how slippery that is. From just that tiny little bit of cream I put on this part, and then I would of course do it on the other part as well. After you clean it, if there's no dents or anything in your slide, it's going to work super smoothly. I would get a small spray bottle. I don't have my spray bottle here, but a tiny little water spray bottle like that. And then all you've got to do is each time you pull out your trombone, you lift this slide up a little, squirt some of that fresh water, just water, nothing else in that, and then close your slide, and that water is going to seep its way down and activate all that cream you put on it. And you won't have to put anything new on your slide for probably a month if it stays clean like that, just a little bit of squirt of water. And then after a month or so, if the water's not really doing it, put a little more of that cream on there, and you'll get that. When you're taking care of your brass instruments, be sure to be careful of the mouthpiece. I grabbed this mouthpiece from one of my closets because somebody had dropped it. So take a look in there. Do you see how that's not round anymore? That's going to affect your sound. So be very careful when you're moving your mouthpiece that it is even. I have a special tool that I can put this on, and if I turn it, it'll help. If I get like a hammer and that kind of stuff. But after I do that, take a look. It's round again. That's going to help my sound. So brass players, look at the end of your mouthpiece. If it's not perfectly round, what's happening, the sound is going in, your air's going in, and then it gets obstructed right there because it's not staying in that perfectly round like the inside of your brass instrument. We want to make sure that's good too. That's going to help your sound as well. We don't have a ton of time left, but those are our basics for brass. So if we have questions, jot them in right now, and I will answer them for you real quickly. I know Sydney had a question. For French horns, if it's a question about French horns, they have what are called rotary valves, and some tubas are the same way. They spin this way instead of up and down like a normal trumpet. Those are a little more complicated to fix if there's a problem. But the same things are true with like putting oil. just put a couple dots of oil on the top of it. You can unscrew the bottom cap and put some oil in there. Don't try to take the valve apart on a French horn because there's strings involved, and that can make it a little complicated. Good question. So Sydney asked about her trumpet. All of you have instruments, hopefully most at home. If you still have one at school, you just need to email me. Be sure to email me so I have it in my email what your instrument looks like, because they all look a little different. I mean, in the case. And the general vicinity of your locker. If you know the exact number, that's even better. But if you know where that instrument is, I can get it put in the office for you, and then you can just pop into the office and they'll get it to you. Okay. Yeah, and I've recorded this, so I'm going to post this if you missed it or just want some more pointers. I will do that. Anybody that wants to join in on the woodwind one in a few minutes, that's great too. Join us for that. And then next week I'll do one of the times I'll do one about percussion for you percussionists that feel left out today. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.